This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio with me, Holly Kingman, on the Thursday morning break. I am so excited to share today's conversation with you. We are talking about the comedy of education with the inimitable Mrs. Smith. So, grab a cuppa, possibly a panty liner if you're prone to accidents when giggling.
This is Teachers Talk Radio,
and
you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So, it's Thursday, the 19th of January. We've had a few days since Blue Monday, which has been disproven as scientifically the bluest day of the year. And I'm going to try and add to that today. I'm going to try and take away from the blues you might be feeling at this stage in January with a really quite warm and brilliant conversation with one of the most promising and upcoming teacher comedians. Although I've been asking myself, are they teacher comedians or comedic teachers? What do we call this brand of teacher that's funny, that shares their comedy on social media or in other ways with stand-up? Of course, there's a number of quite popular, and famous, well-known comedians, Ramesh Ranganathan, for example, that have taken the sidestep from teaching into comedy. But today we are talking to Mrs. Smith. Before we get onto the conversation with Mrs. Smith, though, how are you all feeling? Are you going to be striking in your schools? What's the feeling? You can share your thoughts with me. If you're listening live on Podbean, then you can comment or send me a message directly into the digital studio, or you can join the conversation on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. You can find us by looking up Teachers Talk Radio Official. Now, I've got some really interesting shows lined up over the next few weeks, and then that might be the last you hear of me for a short while. Some of you may know that I'm almost 8.5 months pregnant, which is why I sound so breathy, because I haven't got much space for breathing these days. But slightly on topic, I suppose, next week I will be talking about breastfeeding teachers and how that can be managed in your workplace, how other breastfeeding teachers have coped with that, and what your union will be able to do to support you if you don't feel like you're getting the support from your SLT in school, which I hope you all are. And then after that, we'll have a World Book Day themed conversation, no doubt. Obviously, with English being my specialism, it's like Christmas. I absolutely love World Book Day. I cannot wait. So we have got some great shows lined up over the next few weeks with me. Lots more from the rest of the Teachers Talk Radio team. You can find out about all of the great shows and Twitter spaces that we're hosting over the next few weeks by following us on social media. As I said, that's Teachers Talk Radio Official over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So, what's the funniest teaching joke you've ever heard? I want to hear it. After we've had this conversation with Mrs. Smith, I will be sharing the best ones that you've come up with. And you can share that in the comments on Podbean, or of course over on social media, or you can find me at Holly's_classroom if you're on Instagram, or at Holly's Classroom if you're on Twitter, or Holly Kingman, Holly's Classroom over on Facebook. Let me know what your funniest teaching jokes are, and we'll have a good old giggle at the end of the show. And I'm absolutely thrilled now to welcome, I feel a little bit starstruck actually, Mrs. Smith to Teachers Talk Radio. So Mrs. Smith, teacher comedy extraordinaire. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Actually, nice to be asked.
So look, we all want to know all the ins and outs and all the details, because your anonymity is a very well regarded secret. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about what sort of teacher you are, the phase, sort of where you are geographically, and whatever you are prepared to tell us about Mrs. Smith.
Okay. I mean, it's fairly obvious, probably from my accent, that I'm not from the north of England. So I'm down in the sort of below the Thames, shall we say?
Okay.
But the Thames does go a sort of a whole direction, different route across the UK. So that's fine. I have taught everything from nursery to year 6.
Oh wow!
So I'm a primary school teacher. And I'm going to leave it at that because, primary school teachers can teach anything. So it could be, I may be in one year group at the moment, but I could be in another year group, next year or the year after. So yes, I'm a primary school teacher and I've been doing it for a very long time. I think almost every single member of staff in the school, apart from, I could be their mum. That's how old I am.
I thought you were going to say almost every member of staff in the school. I taught them.
Oh, no. I'm not quite there.
Not quite that old.
No.
Do you have a preference? Is there a year group that you just love teaching?
Sorry, I missed that because my internet played up.
Why no problem. I said, do you have a preference? Is there a year group that you just love? I mean, because you've taught such a broad range of year groups.
I love the class I'm teaching at the moment. So whichever class I happen to be teaching, that's where I really enjoy being, I think.
Okay, so you're an in-the-moment teacher.
Yeah, I think so. And also you have to get into it with your class. So you have to thoroughly enjoy whatever it is you're doing with them. So it doesn't really matter to me whether I'm teaching year 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 reception. That's what I would do. I would have to say, though, I haven't taught early years for a long time. So whilst I could do it, I feel de-skilled about certain things that I will be teaching in the early years. I'd certainly have to do an awful lot of, I could probably walk into a Key Stage 1 or a Key Stage, well, I can walk into a Key Stage 1 or a Key Stage 2 class, read the plans, pick it up and go. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Whereas I think if I was going to do that in early years, I would really have to get my head around it because I would want to make sure I was doing it as well as I possibly could. I wasn't going to be able to wing it, really.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And actually, from following a lot of your content on social media, I can imagine a whole new range of hilarious tales if you were to go into early years. So maybe if that happens further down the line, that might be might be a new source of content for you. So you do have it's very well known that you are very careful about your anonymity. I think all we've ever seen on social media is your hand, usually clasping a glass of something.
Yes.
Why is that anonymity so important to you?
I think partly because sometimes I say things that other people feel they can't say, but things that need to be said. And I think I think it needs to be said, but I don't want people to necessarily attribute it to me as the person. I think I feel that it's got to be attributed to everybody because it seems to belong to everybody. But also, I think people could get the wrong end of the stick about me. And I think they think I absolutely am never, ever making the children the butt of the joke. That's not the idea at all. The children are not. Sometimes what they say is funny, but I'm not laughing at them. I'm laughing at the situation that they then made me think about because they haven't been doing it on purpose to be funny. So I think I wouldn't want people to misunderstand that and then I just think it's much easier to say some of the things I want to say without people attaching them to me.
Yeah, and I think I hadn't given much thought to that, but I think it's a really nice concept that the funny things that you say and some of the sort of professional commentary that you make about teaching, it's the voice of a teacher rather than specifically your voice, because a lot of the things you say
it's definitely
Yeah.
It definitely isn't. It's really odd, and it sounds really sort of up myself, but I don't think of Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith is me, but on steroids. So
Okay.
Mrs. Smith is a completely third person. I would refer to her in the third person. You know, Mrs. Smith might, you know, and it really is not me. She's a distillation of everybody I've worked with, taught, met in meetings, gone to inset with, all of those things. There are elements of me, but with them attached, if you know what I mean.
Wow, so it's almost like a shapeshifter character across everyone you've come across professionally. So yeah, it's the voice of the teaching profession, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want to say it like that, I'd never ever suggest that it was. But yes, I mean, you could say she is, you know, well, I think someone very poorly described as a bog standard class teacher. Absolutely, that awful phrase, but it fits really, I think.
Yeah, and maybe that's why some of your content is so popular, because I think so many of us, and it's evident from the huge numbers that you have following, liking, commenting on your posts on social media. So many of us see and hear ourselves in you know, the stories you tell, the jokes you make when you're talking about the full moon, or if it's a windy day, or, you know, Friday going to the pub, and, you know, all of those things. We all feel those things too. We really do understand that. So how did Mrs. Smith start, and why did you do it?
I just like to sort of write, and I think I'm fairly funny. I've got sort of fairly funny bones. I tell a good story, and I think that's partly to do with being a primary school teacher. You know, you can tell a good story and be quite a good sort of raconteur. Mostly to get out of a hole during sort of a meeting, or, you know, trying to keep the children sort of amused, and you tell a story. And then I started to sort of tell stories about school or things that had happened in class, and I realized that I could actually make people giggle. Probably when, you know, we're in a staff meeting, you shouldn't do, but I could do that. So and I've also sort of written variously in the past, you know, just sort of for myself. So I thought, you know, the old sort of story of, well, you know, why don't I write it down? What could I do with it? So I decided that that's what I would do. I would write down sort of little vignette stories, and I just wrote them in a notebook, and I passed around to people to read them, and they laughed and thought it was quite funny. And I thought, well, so what could I do with this that's not going to keep it in a notebook in a drawer, that's not going to get me the sack, not going to, you know, bring teaching into disrepute, because absolutely it's the best thing. I mean, I love it. It's my, you know, my job, my life, and I wouldn't change it for anything else. So what could I do? So I decided that actually what I would do was, there was a crossover between sort of people blogging and then moving into sort of other social medias. And I'm neither interested, not young enough to do TikTok or anything else. And I couldn't do anything that was visual. I couldn't do anything that was going to put me, I mean, heaven forbid, behind a video camera, or, you know, my phone, or, you know, sitting in my kitchen doing anything like that. So it had to be written, and the place that I put it, you know, because, you know, as my kids would say, it's where all the old people go, is
Facebook.
On Facebook. So I wrote them on Facebook and did them like that. And one post, and I put them on there and made sure that, you know, people couldn't track back to me and all of that. And one post I wrote went, I mean, absolutely viral and completely ballistic. And in this first school some holidays when I wrote it, and I think it got some ridiculous number of shares, and you know, 500,000 reads or reach or whatever. So I did that.
Wow.
And then it's sort of steadily gone from there, really. Yeah, I mean, it probably went viral.
Amazing. And when was that? Did you say that was
about 4 years ago? Yeah, about 4 years ago. So it's gone sort of bonkers since then, really. So that was, I started with, I know, 3 men and a dog, and, you know, half the people in the staff room at school, and then it went from there to currently over 45,000 followers.
Incredible. I think I've been following you for about 6 months on social media, and I feel like every few weeks you're like, oh, I've now hit 30,000. Oh, I've now hit 40,000.
Yeah,
it seems like your reach and your figures are rising exponentially at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is, because I don't actually think that's a huge amount to do with me particularly. I think it's a lot to do with people discovering Mrs. Smith and actually it being
it's a thing.
Teaching can be a really lonely profession, even though we're with people all day long. And I think that people suddenly will read a post and say, oh, that could be me, or that could be my friend, or oh, I felt like that today, or thank goodness it's not only me. And I think we move along in that direction. So I don't think it's anything to do with me. I think it's more to do with Mrs. Smith, if that makes sense.
Maybe you're right, or maybe maybe you're honing your skills as well. You're honing your I hate to say brand, but you know what I mean, your style it's quite distinct. I think if I read something and I couldn't see who had posted it, I think I'd be able to tell if it was Mrs. Smith.
I think so. I mean, it's fairly sort of pithy mostly.
It's fabulous. So for anyone that's listening that hasn't actually read any of Mrs. Smith's content, you really must get yourself over to Facebook and look it up and have a good read, and you will be chuckling along, because they really are just really honest reflections on the profession, without, like you say, making children the butt of jokes, which some comedy teachers on social media do. It's not sort of slagging off the profession, you know. It's very warm, I think, as well, and I think that's why lots of people it's warm and resigned to what life as a teacher is like. And
I mean, it's warm unless you are Secretary of State for Education, who's done something utterly ridiculous, and then in which
then you're in trouble, aren't you?
Okay, so I am going to go for your jugular.
And so you should, when you have a mouthpiece and you have that audience, then absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you think comedy naturally goes hand in hand with education, or do you think you need to dig deep to find those comedy moments?
Oh no, my class is comedy gold, absolute comedy gold. They give me little nuggets constantly that I couldn't possibly use, because they wouldn't be able to pin them down to themselves. But also I think it's that sort of dark humor, isn't it? I think when you're in it and you're feeling pulled down by it, the only thing you can do is laugh about it. You know, gallows humour is what they call it. Whilst I don't think schools necessarily like the gallows, there is that feeling that, you know, we need to just, what can you do but laugh? And it is utterly ridiculous. Some of the things we're asked to do, some of the things that are said to us, you know, you've got, I don't know, 450 children in a school, and you say to a parent, the parent will say to you, they've lost their jumper, and you say, well, and I say, it's blue. You think, well, so are all the other 449 in school. So could we narrow it down a bit? And I don't quite think in their heads anyone really sort of thinks about that until you have to, but you have to do it with a straight face. Whereas if other places you go, what? You can't.
I think we're so desensitized as teachers now that we sometimes forget how ridiculous and comedy so much of working in education really is.
Yeah. I mean, or you will say to somebody, whose poo is that? When there's one on the carpet, and you'll say, oh, whose poo is that? And you think, no, I don't need to know who it belongs to. I just need it not to be there. So it's just daft.
I think a lot of parents can empathise with a lot of the comedy moments that we experience as teachers. And I mean I'm secondary trained now, sort of teaching the middle school years, but sometimes I find myself, I say something to my children and I think, my goodness, I never thought I would. I mean, a few weeks back I said to one of my daughters, they are 5 and under, so they are very little, do not put that rhinoceros in your vagina. And I just think afterwards, is this really where I thought my life as a parent would go? And I think teaching is like that, isn't it? You end up, with these moments that you just think, my goodness, how did we get here?
I mean, I just remember, I do actually, when I was learning to be a teacher, so I was, it was a very long time ago, and we had to do an Easter production, and there were 3 boys sitting in a cardboard boat on a stage, deciding, they were fishers of men, and they were fighting over something or other. And I remember one teacher bellowing from the back of the class, "Would Jesus have been behaving like that?" I thought, actually, do you know what? That's a really tricky question for a 9-year-old.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about one of your funniest moments you've had in the classroom? I'm sure there are hundreds to pick from.
Oh, do you know what? They're all. Let me have a think. Oh no. Actually, I have got one. When I was teaching Year 3, so I had a child who was sitting at their table, and they were sitting very quietly, which was quite unusual for them. And after all, I sort of went over and I noticed that what they were doing was they built a little maze out of pencils for a worm that was crawling around on their table. And I said, well, I think that worm needs to go outside because it's going to be missing its friends. And this child looked at me and said, no, it's all right. His friends are in my drawer. So we then had to go to the drawer and get out, I mean, another snail and a couple more worms. And I think most things were alive by the time we got outside. But you still think, well, all right, but how long had they been in there? I didn't actually ask that question.
It's probably best not to know.
No. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that really you think, oh, yeah.
And I expect you have a really good chuckle with your support staff in the classroom about what's going on.
Yeah, and in the class, yeah, absolutely. And some of them who know what I do will say, I think that's a Mrs. Smith moment. And you can say, I think it might be at some time in the future. So, yeah.
Have you ever had a teaching assistant or somebody in your class that you couldn't really work with because you both made each other laugh? Because I don't know if she'll be listening to this, and a colleague of mine, Anne-Marie, a few years back, we just really couldn't get the job done because we just found the students and what we were doing and everything so funny. We bounced off each other a bit too well.
Yeah.
Have you had any colleagues like that you've just really brought out the best in each other's comedy?
Yeah, there are some who I know that we're gonna stick, or we don't dare catch each other's eye, but we can always manage just to hold it together, because sometimes if you give an inch, those children will take a mile. So you've actually got to be really quite on top of it.
Yeah,
certainly some of the cohorts that I've taught in the past. So yeah, we can probably manage to hold it together probably until break time, and then we just have to. Although I have to say, I did have to read Enid Blyton once, and it was in the dark of the dungeon, and put her hand on Dick's, at which point I thought I was about to go. A member of staff actually went into the cupboard because they didn't know what to do about it, and that was one of the low points possibly.
I think I've had a really similar moment actually with my colleague Anne-Marie, teaching A Christmas Carol to Year 7, and one of the ghosts says, "Touch my robe," and we just had to not look at each other. And I haven't worked with her for years, but we live quite close, and sometimes if I see her in the street and I'm driving along, I'll wind my window down and say, "Touch my robe," and then you just see her falling about in the street laughing, and everyone looking at her like, "Oh my goodness, what's going on with that poor woman?" So let's talk about your awards, because I mean, for starters, I noticed that Teacher Toolkit had picked you as the #1 funny teacher on social media. That was back in June. Yes.
Oh, did they? No, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it was a blog post, and it was funny teachers you should follow on social media. And I fully expected to see Tommy TikTok in there, who I interviewed on Teachers Talk Radio months back. But no, you were right at the very top, Mrs. Smith.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Oh, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't know about that.
You have to Google yourself more often.
I will.
I do it every now and then.
At least you now know that I don't Google myself.
But what I did, of course, know from following you on social media is that you were nominated for a Funny Women Award. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the Content Creator Award, which was fantastic. I mean, I did ask people if they'd like to nominate me, as I didn't nominate myself, and people did. And actually, it was really interesting that at the event to find out that, I mean, I didn't win, and that's fine. I was up against people who have millions of followers, so the odds of that happening are really slim. But it was really nice to have an evening out in a theatre of an evening that wasn't anything to do with education. It was really quite a nice thing to do. But actually, they did say that there were lots of engagement, so it was really nice, and that all those people who bothered to vote for Mrs. Smith actually did it. And I don't share DNA with all of them, so it was really quite nice, you know.
But yeah, I'll bet. So I mean, I suppose your colleagues at school must have been really excited and proud of you for that as well.
Oh, well, I hope they were proud of me.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. They must have been. So it's no secret to them that you're Mrs. Smith.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure. I think it's as bonkers as I do that actually people find me funny. You know, I find me funny, but just because I find me funny and laugh at what I think is funny doesn't mean that anyone else is necessarily going to laugh at what I find funny. I think people, I'm less surprised that people get cross about the things I get cross about. But I try and make it so that we can laugh about it at the same time, or at least make whoever it is that we're laughing at the butt of the joke. Because it's their absurdities, I think, sometimes that need sort of pointing out. Bubbles need to be burst.
I think we all do find that side of it funny, and I'm not surprised one little bit that people nominated you and supported you for that nomination. So do you follow any other teacher comedians or comedic teachers? I don't know, what do we call your category? I don't know.
Edutainment. Edutainment probably is some awful phrase that they're going to call it. Who do I follow? I follow Mr. P. So yeah. I follow Mr. P. Do you know what? I actually don't. If I'm going to read anything or watch anything, it tends to be the TES or stuff like that. It tends to be sort of more the actual, or or I'll watch the Twitter wars, because Twitter is always an interesting place.
Yes.
To be, because it absolutely it's like watching the playground on a windy day. Something is about to happen on Twitter. So I tend to follow lots of people on there and watch them kick off, but I don't actually join in. So that's not comedy, but it has the potential to be. So that's really where I am.
I suppose you could draw on that for some of your own content, some of your own ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Although I have to say, some people are extraordinarily obvious as to who they would be, either by what they've said or the way they behave, or the views they hold. So perhaps I'm better off.
Yeah.
Off not. So I don't want to be done for anything libelous, really.
Great. I've recently started following the Unofficial Teacher's Manual. And it's a combination of memes and very short posts and videos. But I think as teachers, we all like a little bit of teacher comedy. And of course, I follow Mr. P. And if you've heard of James Partridge, who it's not comedy, although some of it will take you back to comedy moments of your own school days. But James Partridge does the Assembly Bangers.
Yes, I have seen this. And the Christmas Bangers. No, I have watched lots and lots of those. Actually, the other people I do is people like the Fake Head Teacher and SLT Newbie on Twitter. I follow them because I think they're in a very similar vein. There's the same sort of tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic humour that I quite like.
Yeah, definitely in the same sort of vein. Yeah. How important do you think comedy is for teachers?
I missed that completely because my
Oh.
internet was.
How important is comedy for teachers? And I'm going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most important thing.
Oh, I would say probably 8 or 9. I think it's really important that we are able to laugh and in some way that sort of helps you regulate your emotions. I think sometimes when we're at school, especially if you've had you want to laugh about it afterwards, you want to laugh with people, that sort of laughter and in jokes is what's a part of the glue as well as chat that keeps everybody together. So to be able to giggle about something,
it does create a sense of community, doesn't it, in the staff room when you have
whether it's to do with school or not. I would much rather go into a staff room where there's lots of laughter than go in a staff room where there isn't, actually.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, it goes back to what you were saying about gallows humour and, you know, when there are those dark moments and those difficult days, finding the comedy in what we do, I suppose helps pull us through or guide us through those days.
And it lifts your spirits and improves your well-being. And I mean, we all like a joke and a giggle, especially if it's slightly grubby. We all like one of those, you know, sort of bit of a giggle, don't we? And I think that's what keeps us going. And actually, if I didn't have that kind of humour within the staff room, I wouldn't listen and pick up and think, oh, do you know what, I could use that, or I could add that to something, or I could turn that around. And, you know, there we go. Because I've got to post every day, because I've started now, so I have to do it. I can't not. If I don't, people think I'm sort of, there's something the matter with me. So I've got to post every day. So I've got to find.
Do you get messages from people saying you haven't posted in a couple of days? Are you okay? Because we've got a similar number Facebook followers, and if I don't post for a week, everyone knows I've got very small children, but if I don't post for a week or so, I do get some messages going, just checking in. We haven't heard anything from you. Okay.
Yeah. No, I get I post every day. I mean, every single day. So 365 every single day, and that's partly I started with. But it can only be it just has to be a line. It doesn't have to be masses. That was actually to exercise my writing muscle. That was no other reason than to make sure that I was keeping on. But then, you know, you've got to be funny, haven't you? Which is a bit of a pressure. Which is then sometimes I'm not funny. Sometimes I'm quite serious about things, especially about sort of SEND and people's health and well-being and government idiots, you know, those sorts of things I will talk about, but I need to find something to talk about every single day, and in school there will always be something.
When you do talk about serious things, I think it does make your audience sit up and listen, because we're so used to the comedy, and then when the comedy's not there, we sort of, oh my goodness, what? Okay, this is important, this is serious. So I suppose as well, you've created a great platform for raising awareness and you know, for a range of topics that are really important to you and your perspective on things.
And I try not to be. I try to be sort of fairly all-encompassing, because I could actually pick things that are very, very important to me, but actually aren't that going to be important to everybody else. But I think I tend to choose things that I think are important to the whole of education and school staff, and things that will be important to them. And sometimes things that are not actually said out loud, or not often said out loud, but that need to be said out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we all love Mrs. Smith so much. So what's next for Mrs. Smith? Where do you go now?
Well, I don't know, really. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to carry on doing Mrs. Smith, you know, until I retire, and then, well, I don't know. I might have to do something about living in an old people's home. I mean, I don't know. That's where I am.
Have you been approached for a book yet?
Ish. All right. So yes, I've got something written. I've got some really. I had a really, really, really interesting email recently, but I've got to wait and see what's going to come of that. I did a stand-up course, not to do anything other than just because I fancy doing it. And I can't do that because of, anonymity and everything else. But I might quite like to do, I don't know, I'm just going to carry on do some writing, but definitely I've got some stuff for books done.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wait and see what happens. So I'm not going to spoil anything by saying something that then may not happen. But I hope different things will happen. I'm happy to carry on keeping on. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
stuff might happen.
I think these things evolve, and I think when you attract such a wide audience, someone somewhere wants to cash in on that. On your So people, I would have been really surprised if you said, "Oh, no one's approached me for a book." Even if it was just a book of like all of your content, I mean, that would be a great read. A little bit like
no one has approached me for a book.
Why not? If anyone's listening
absolutely, I would say why not, but no one has. And but I think because actually, when you come to do books and everything else, sometimes the persona that's attached to them is what sells it. And if she's anonymous and if she's not real, then
it's hard to.
It's more difficult, isn't it?
Well, Fake Head Teacher has done it, or is it SLT Newbie? One of them has got a book out. Just putting some thoughts out there.
I mean, also, I have I don't know anybody. I've been in education for over 30 years, so education is what I know. So I could probably, know someone who knows someone to get some cheap Frit sticks. I have no idea who I would talk to in the publishing industry or anything.
Maybe someone listening to this. I mean, I know I tagged you in a few things months back, saying I think you'd be a great host on Teachers Talk Radio. And SLT Newbie and Fake Head Teacher, and now we actually have a briefing once a week from Fake Head Teacher. But it would really be wonderful to have some content from Mrs. Smith as well. I think the comedy element, is really attractive to people in these difficult times.
I like doing radio. I mean, I've in a past life I have done some radio, but whether not as a presenter, but as a guested and stuff. So
well, as a guest, you've been absolutely fabulous on Teachers Talk Radio, and it's been so nice to hear.
I love doing it.
Well, you can tell because it's been. I've enjoyed interviewing you, but I have no doubt everybody will find this a really, really enjoyable show. And to have sort of found out a little bit more about you and what you do and why you do what you're doing now. So thank you so much for coming on to Teachers Talk Radio. And this, I'm sure, is obviously not the end of Mrs. Smith on Teachers Talk Radio. I might get you back for some other comedy inspired something or other further down the line. And we'll look out for that book, Mrs. Smith.
Well, I mean, let's not spoil it, but I mean, I hope that something will come of this very interesting email that I recently had. Of course, it may not, but fingers crossed.
We'll have everything crossed with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Strike action dominates the news again, with a range of outlets reporting on disputes across England, Wales and Scotland. Whilst the NASUWT union reported 9 out of 10 teachers who voted in a ballot over pay voted in favour of strike action in England and Wales, the union also reported only a 42% turnout. This is below the threshold needed for lawful strike action. The union stated that whilst a strike would now not go ahead, the union remains in formal dispute with the government. The NEU is yet to release the results of its ballot and will also need to reach the 50% member turnout needed for lawful industrial action. In Scotland, the Scottish Secondary Teachers Association has warned of further strike action following walkouts by primary and secondary staff. It says it has no option unless the Scottish Government puts forward a suitable pay offer. The AIS Union and Scottish NASUWT members also aim to continue with strike action until an agreement is reached. Scottish Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville maintains that the demand for a 10% pay rise continues to be unaffordable. Meanwhile, the University and College Union has announced 15 new strike days planned across 150 UK universities in February and March. It has said that a pay offer worth between 4 and 5% made during recent talks is not enough, although the group representing university employers says that the offer is actually worth up to 7%. This comes after the government announced that tuition fees in England will be frozen for another 2 years. Although this is good news for students, the strikes mean more disruption to courses already affected by the pandemic. However, the National Union of Students has been broadly supportive of the industrial action, at least so far. Away from strike action, there have been further stories focusing on what should be taught in schools. This time, the focus is on educating pupils in the dangers of social media in spreading messages that are misogynistic and deeply toxic. The HuffPost website reports on Labour MP Alex Davies-Jones, who called in Parliament for ministers to do more to stamp out Andrew Tate-style misogyny and to stop boys being brainwashed. The MP asked what was being done to tackle radicalisation of young men. But PM Rishi Sunak responded that he was proud that this government launched the world-leading, world-first online safety bill. He also made reference to the autumn statement announcement of £2 billion of extra funding to schools. Although he did not respond with any direct reference to Tate, the online safety bill is expected to complete its final stages in the Commons shortly, before heading to the House of Lords. New figures released recently show that school absences in December were almost double the annual rate, and that this was due to illness. The absence rate, as reported in the Evening Standard, was 14.3% across state schools in the week beginning December the 12th, an increase from 7.8% across the year. The Department for Education in England said the increase was due to a rise in sick days as a result of winter illnesses such as flu, as well as COVID-19 and strep A infections such as scarlet fever. In the Channel Island of Jersey, BBC News reports that the government has brought in 11 UK supply teachers to cover for absent staff. The short-term and long-term measures have been put in place due to staffing shortages, and the supply teachers will cover for up to 2 terms. Short-term housing has been organised for those travelling to the island. The Jersey government said the current vacancy rate for Jersey was 4.3%, but that the long-term plan was to train, recruit, retain and upskill school staff. Finally, the Meanwhile in the Middle East section of the CNN website reports on the United Arab Emirates' plan to become the first Arab nation to teach about the Holocaust in its schools. The move has been praised by some and criticised by others. The nation revealed its plans in a recent tweet and intends to include Holocaust education in both primary and secondary schools. The UAE says it will work with Tel Aviv and Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem, to help build the new curriculum. Whilst many see the move as part of the normalisation of relations with Israel, critics suggest that it does not reflect all of those living in the UAE, with many disagreeing with this policy. Full details of the story can be found on the CNN website, with comments on both sides explored in detail. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, let's start the new year with investigating the power of artificial intelligence in education. A lot of people are asking, does your school block ChatGPT? First of all, what is it? Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, or GPT for short, is a piece of software designed to mimic talking to a person. The difference is, this person is super clever, and it's been trained by thousands of conversations in the past, and it remembers them all. There are lots of chatbots out there. GPT is popular with young people as the answers it gives are not only correct, but can be slightly different each time, so it's more difficult for a teacher to spot a copy and paste homework. Let's put it to the test with a couple of school questions. I'm using a screen reader to represent ChatGPT to give it a voice. Responses are usually in text and appear as if they're being typed really quickly. I asked, what are the registers in a processor? And I got...
Registers are a type of memory that is built into the central processing unit, CPU, of a computer. They are used to store data and instructions that the CPU needs to access quickly in order to perform its functions. There are different types of registers, each with a specific purpose. For example, the instruction register stores the current instruction that the CPU is executing, while the program counter register stores the address of the next instruction to be executed.
I'll stop GPT there as 3 paragraphs were given in this answer and it's only a 1 or 2 mark question. So I asked, can you tell me in 2 sentences? And I got...
Registers are small, high-speed memory units built into the central processing unit, CPU, of a computer that are used to store data and instructions. They allow the CPU to access and manipulate data and instructions quickly, enabling it to carry out complex tasks at high speeds.
Well, thank you, GPT. That's much more to the point. Powerful, right? How about, can you summarise Of Mice and Men?
Of Mice and Men is a novella by John Steinbeck, published in 1937. It tells the story of George Milton and Lenny Small, 2 displaced migrant ranch workers during the Great Depression in California. Despite their apparent differences, the 2 men are deeply bonded and rely on each other for companionship and support. The novella ends tragically when Lenny, a simple-minded man with a love for soft things, accidentally kills a ranch owner's wife while trying to touch a soft dress, and George is forced to make the difficult decision to euthanize Lenny before he can be punished for the crime.
That's fantastic. However, there's some words in there that are quite big, and my teacher would be quite suspicious that I copied and pasted it. So I'll ask, can you summarise Of Mice and Men simply?
Of Mice and Men is a story about 2 ranch workers, George and Lenny, who are travelling together and looking for work during the Great Depression. Lenny is a large, simple-minded man with a love for soft things, and George is his caretaker and protector. Despite their differences, the 2 men are deeply bonded and rely on each other for companionship and support. However, their relationship is ultimately tested when Lenny accidentally kills a ranch owner's wife, and George is forced to make a difficult decision to protect Lenny from the consequences of his actions.
That's more like it. Now my homework's done, I think I just bought myself some more time on my games console. As always, I'd love to hear what you want to know about tech. Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods. Your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, I feel like I say this every single time I'm on air, but I really do love 2 Minute Tech. I think I need to find out a little bit more about this topic and to make sure I'm not being hoodwinked by my students. But there you go. So I did ask you all at the start of the show, what is the funniest teaching joke that you've heard? And our very own Harry Waters, one of our fabulous hosts, shared with me. The teacher asks, name 2 pronouns, and the student says, you've all heard this one before, I'm sure. Who? Me? But I think it's fair to say that Mrs. Smith is probably by far the funniest person that we've heard from in the show today. So as I was saying at the start of the show, I will be having a baby soon. So we've got just a few weeks left of me bringing the Thursday morning break to you. And I'm really looking forward to my show next week, which will be looking at breastfeeding teachers and the support they should expect to receive from their SLT in school, how to make it work, cases where it hasn't worked and how it could have worked, to enable teachers who want to carry on breastfeeding once they return from maternity leave to be able to do that. So if that's you, or if that's someone that you know, or someone that you think might benefit from listening to that conversation, then do please tune in. We do actually have an NEU rep coming along to share some of what your rights are around this topic. So, what a show today. I think I need a rest. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the lighter side of education, and I thoroughly look forward to seeing you all again next week.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time. on Teachers Talk Radio.